Welcome to Life Stories, where real emotions, hard lessons, and unexpected transformations unfold. Today's story is about Sophia, a woman who was once dismissed by her own family only to rise as one of the most celebrated chefs in New York City. When her mother and sister finally realize the truth, they are forced to confront their past mistakes and learn the true meaning of value, love, and humility. How will they rebuild their broken bonds? Watch until the end to find out. Subscribe to Life Stories to begin today's journey. The invitation had arrived on thick, high-quality paper, embossed with delicate gold lettering. My sister Emily's handwriting was as elegant as ever, precise, flawless, just like the life she had meticulously curated for herself. The Wilson Carter baby shower. A grand affair, no doubt. As I stood before the glass doors of La Maison, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants, I caught a glimpse of my reflection. The soft grey silk dress I had chosen clung to me just right, simple, sophisticated, understated. A single strand of pearls rested at my throat. A gift I had bought for myself the day I opened my restaurant. The sapphire table. 10 years ago. The venue, perched atop a high-rise overlooking Central Park, was the epitome of old-money elegance. I understood why it had been chosen. Emily's husband, David Carter, was an investment banker, and his clients frequented this place. My sister had always moved in circles where appearances mattered more than authenticity. I knew that all too well. "Do you have a reservation?" The hostess's tone was polite but firm, her eyes scanning me with a flicker of doubt. I handed her my invitation, watching as she searched the guest list. "The Wilson Carter baby shower," I said evenly. A brief hesitation. A quick, appraising glance. And then, "Of course. Right this way." I knew that look. The same one I had been receiving for years. The one that whispered in hushed undertones, "Oh, she's the sister who works at a bar." A lie that had taken on a life of its own, nurtured by my family's unwillingness to acknowledge my success. They never cared to know the truth. Or perhaps, they did and simply chose to ignore it. Inside, the room was already filled with elegantly dressed guests, sipping champagne beneath the soft glow of chandeliers. Laughter bubbled in the air, a melody of privilege and self-assurance. Women in designer dresses exchanged knowing glances, their delicate manicures resting on the stems of crystal flutes. And there, at the heart of it all, was Emily, 7 months pregnant, radiant, dressed in a perfectly tailored maternity gown. A diamond necklace, no doubt a gift from David, glittered at her throat. Beside her stood our mother, Linda, immaculate as ever, her posture flawless, her hair sculpted to perfection. They were surrounded by members of their world, women from exclusive country clubs, wives of CEOs, socialites, the very same people who had always viewed me as an anomaly, a misstep in an otherwise perfect lineage. "Well, Sophia, you actually came." My mother's voice carried that familiar edge, an almost imperceptible note of disappointment. I had heard it my entire life. The last decade had seen me attending only the most necessary family gatherings, Christmas, perhaps an occasional birthday. It had been a silent agreement, a mutual understanding. They had their world, and I had mine. Yet as I stepped further into the room, something felt amiss. I scanned the tables, elegantly dressed in white linen, each one adorned with pastel blue floral arrangements. Place cards sat neatly at each setting, names inscribed in delicate calligraphy. But mine was nowhere to be found. A quiet murmur rippled through the air. I could feel eyes on me, whispers exchanged behind polite smiles. Emily's friends from her private school days were casting quick glances in my direction. "Is that her?" one murmured, her voice just loud enough for me to hear. "The sister. I thought she worked at a bar." I took a slow, steady breath. 10 years ago, such words would have stung. But I had learned, oh, How I had learned. My success did not require validation from these people. Emily approached, her expression carefully composed, but I could see the flicker of amusement in her eyes. You seem to be having trouble finding your seat, she said, her voice dripping with mock concern. I smiled, tilting my head slightly. It does seem that way. Beside her, David stood, observing me with the same calculating gaze he likely used in high-stakes investment meetings. We had a sudden increase in guests. You see, Emily continued, her lips curving into an almost apologetic smile. We had to prioritize our more important guests. Ah, there it was. The unspoken truth. I was not an important guest. I never had been. But Emily wasn't finished. Don't worry, though, she said, her voice suddenly brightening, as if struck by a brilliant idea. There's a charming little pub just across the street. That might be more your style. Laughter rippled through the nearby guests, a soft wave of amusement at my expense. My mother, standing beside Emily, allowed herself a small, smug smile. That does sound perfect for you, dear, she added. The final dagger. I held their gaze. Steady. Unwavering. 10 years of distance. Of painstakingly building something from nothing. Of proving my worth in a way they would never understand, all of it condensed into this moment. And yet, I smiled. I'll do that, I said softly, my voice smooth, effortless. There was something in my expression, something Emily and my mother couldn't quite place. It wasn't anger. It wasn't shame. It was certainty. Enjoy your baby shower. I turned on my heel, my movements graceful, composed. My heels clicked softly against the marble floor as I walked away, their laughter fading behind me. In the hallway, I paused by a window. The city stretched before me, bathed in the golden glow of the setting sun. And there, nestled among the towering buildings, stood the sapphire table. A 3-month wait list. Michelin inspectors arriving next week. My restaurant. My empire. Built with my own hands. Emily and my mother still saw me as the girl they had cast aside. But the world knew exactly who I was. And soon enough, they would too. The week after the baby shower, my mother, Linda, sat at her usual spot in the breakfast nook, sipping her coffee as she leafed through the New York Times. It was her morning ritual, reading about the world while remaining blissfully detached from it. That morning, however, something unexpected caught her eye. A full-page feature in the New Yorker, headlined in bold letters, "The Sapphire Table, New York's Hidden Culinary Treasure." She read on, her grip on the porcelain cup tightening. The article described a small, exclusive restaurant in Manhattan's Beacon Hill district, just 20 seats, decorated with vintage chandeliers and antique furnishings. A place where food wasn't just served but crafted. It spoke of a chef known only as Chef Sophia, a woman who had trained in France under the legendary Jean-Pierre Dufresne, one of the most respected culinary figures in the world. The writer detailed the difficulty of securing a reservation. The wait list extended for months. And even then, only those with a letter of recommendation from existing patrons stood a chance. And then, just before the final paragraph, my mother's eyes landed on a sentence that sent a jolt through her chest. Behind this exclusive culinary haven stands Chef Sophia Wilson, an enigmatic force redefining fine dining in America. The cup in her hands trembled slightly. Sophia Wilson. At that same moment, Emily walked into the kitchen, balancing her phone and a steaming mug of tea. She had just entered her final trimester, and pregnancy fatigue was starting to set in. She slid into the seat across from our mother, noticing the pale expression on her face. "Mom," she asked, taking a sip of tea, "you look like you've seen a ghost." Linda didn't respond right away. Instead, she slowly turned the magazine toward Emily, tapping a manicured finger against the page. Emily leaned in, reading quickly, her brows knitting together in confusion. And then, Her face went blank. A long, heavy silence filled the room. Then, almost whispering, "No. No, that can't be." The moment hung in the air, thick with disbelief. 4 years. They had dismissed me, pushing me to the outskirts of their perfect world. And now, the same people they spent their lives trying to impress, the socialites, the investors, the wealthy elite, were desperate for a seat at my table. And they had no idea. Emily scrolled through her phone with frantic fingers, searching for more information. But the Sapphire Table's website was infuriatingly cryptic. No photos of me, only a brief history of the restaurant and a booking page that made one thing clear: not just anyone could get in. Emily's husband, David, walked in just as she muttered, "We should go." He raised an eyebrow. "Go where?" Emily hesitated for a second, then turned the magazine toward him. David's face changed. He was a man who spent his life making calculated decisions, predicting financial markets, reading people like spreadsheets. But even he couldn't hide his surprise. "The Sapphire Table," he murmured. "I've heard of it. Executives at my firm have been trying to get a reservation for months." That was the moment it hit them. Their black sheep of a sister, the one they had all but disowned, had built something so untouchable, so desirable, that even they had no access to it. It was a wound to their pride that no amount of social maneuvering could fix. Emily clenched her jaw, refusing to believe that I had kept this from them for so long. How could I have achieved all this without them knowing? That afternoon, my mother, now restless with unease, took a walk through Beacon Hill. She had never paid much attention to my restaurant before, dismissing it as an insignificant endeavor. But now she saw it in a new light. The Sapphire Table stood there, dignified, its brick facade bathed in the soft afternoon glow. The windows, large but frosted just enough to maintain an air of mystery, offered only glimpses of the world inside. As she watched, a sleek black car pulled up, and a well-dressed couple stepped out. A hostess greeted them at the door, her posture professional, her expression warm but unreadable. Then, the door opened again, and I stepped out. I wasn't dressed in designer clothes like my sister or mother would have preferred. Instead, I wore my chef's whites, my name embroidered neatly above my heart. But what caught my mother off guard wasn't my appearance, it was the way people looked at me. A well-known artist, someone she had seen on television, clapped me on the shoulder, thanking me for another exquisite meal. Staff members emerged from the kitchen, offering respectful bows, waiting for my approval before returning inside. And then came the moment that shattered whatever illusions she had left. One of my sous chefs approached me hesitantly. "Chef, about tonight's Michelin inspection." I nodded. "Proceed as usual." My mother stiffened. Michelin. It wasn't just a successful restaurant. It was one of the best in the country. She stood frozen, watching as I exchanged a few more words with my staff before heading back inside. And in that moment, she realized the truth. For 10 years, she had been blind. For 10 years, she had scorned me, looked down on me, dismissed me as less than. And for 10 years, I had been building something extraordinary, something that no amount of money, social status, or empty words could buy. That night, as she sat alone in her pristine living room, she picked up the magazine again, rereading the article word for word. And for the first time in a very long time, my mother felt something she never expected to feel toward me. The morning after my mother saw me at the Sapphire Table, she did something she hadn't done in years. She called me. I let it ring. A second call followed. Then a third. I stared at my phone, watching her name light up the screen. A part of me, the younger me, wanted to answer, to hear whatever excuse she had, whatever feeble attempt at pretending this wasn't about her wounded pride. But the woman I had become, the woman who had spent a decade building something for herself, without the approval of the family who had cast her aside, knew better. So, I let the calls go to voicemail. Later that evening, as the restaurant hummed with activity, my sous chef approached me. "Chef, there's a woman at the front door asking for you." I already knew who it was before I even looked up. Sure enough, my mother stood outside the restaurant. Her expensive coat pulled tightly around her, her face set in an expression of forced composure. She had never been here before. She had never cared to. And now, standing at the threshold of a place she had dismissed for years, she was met with the same exclusivity that she had once prided herself on belonging to. "Good evening," the hostess greeted her. "My daughter owns this restaurant," my mother said, lifting her chin. "I'd like a table." The hostess smiled politely, though I could see the flicker of awareness in her eyes. "I'm afraid we're fully booked for the next 3 months. My mother stiffened. "Perhaps you don't understand, I'm Sophia Wilson's mother." A pause. Then, the hostess excused herself, disappearing briefly into the dining room. When she returned, her expression remained impeccably neutral. "I'm sorry," she said with quiet finality, "but the chef has requested that you follow the normal reservation procedure." My mother said nothing. Not at first. Her breath came in short, shallow bursts, her fingers tightening around the strap of her designer handbag. The weight of the moment settled onto her shoulders, the sharp realization cutting through her like glass. 4 years. She had dictated who was worthy of being welcomed into her world. And now, for the first time, she found herself standing on the other side of that locked door. She turned away stiffly, walking back into the night. But she wasn't the only one trying to find her way in. A week later, Emily stood outside the restaurant. Unlike our mother, she didn't walk straight to the hostess. She lingered across the street for a while, her posture uncertain, her hands tucked into the pockets of her coat. She had always been the confident one, the sister who moved through life with ease, who never had to wonder if she belonged. But tonight, standing in front of the sapphire table, she hesitated. Finally, she gathered her courage and crossed the street. "I'd like to make a reservation," she told the hostess. The hostess didn't bat an eye. "Do you have a letter of recommendation from an existing guest?" Emily's mouth opened slightly, but no words came. She hadn't expected that. She hadn't expected that she, of all people, would need someone else's approval to enter. When she turned to leave, I saw it. The flicker of something deeper than frustration. Something that looked a lot like regret. She didn't try to contact me directly. Not yet. But that night, she sat in her car outside my restaurant long after the lights inside had dimmed, staring at the place where, for the first time in her life, she wasn't allowed in. And I had no anger left. No bitterness. Only quiet resignation. 4 years. They had seen me as the failure of the family. The one who didn't fit. Now, for the first time, they were the outsiders. Months passed, and for the first time, my mother and sister truly humbled themselves. They didn't ask for favors. They didn't try to use our family name to get through the doors of the sapphire table. Instead, they chose the hardest path. They worked for it. Emily, once accustomed to luxury, learned the grit of the kitchen. Washing dishes, peeling vegetables, and understanding the labor behind every plated dish. My mother, once obsessed with social status, served guests with quiet grace, realizing that respect was earned, not inherited. One evening, after closing, I called them both to the dining room. "Shall we sit as a family this time?" I asked. Tears welled in their eyes. That night, for the first time in years, we shared a meal together, not as strangers, but as people who had finally learned the true meaning of value. Subscribe to Life Stories for more inspiring videos.